Chapter 7. Cross my heart and hope to die. Luminescent green eyes, I pondered as Natalie and I drew back into the party. We stayed at least 5 steps behind Tom, shuffling wordlessly between ourselves. Where had I seen luminescent green eyes? I had an answer to this. It was the use of the word luminescent which triggered something in me. I could see them too, glowing bright, somewhat boxy rather than natural. The headlights of a machine, maybe? I toddled off towards the kitchen, intent on a glass of water to clear my head. There was a memory trying to emerge, something hidden away deep down, something so obscure that maybe I'd dreamt it. Nearing the kitchen counter, 2 boys fought over a roll of bread. It was a strange thing that would only happen with intoxicated teenagers. The roll looked stale anyway. It crunched beneath their fingers. Once one boy had a hold of the treasure, he launched it at the kitchen wall, causing it to explode. "That shit's stale, Mark," they said. "I'll find you a better one." The other boy nodded wearily, and they went back to searching. On the counter, under the impact zone, there was a half of a bread roll and a steady coating of crumbs. Crumbs, I gasped. The green eyes. They were that memory, weren't they? On the 5th of November, 1996, there was unrest in the Grey household. I'd had a fight with Dad. Such fights would always begin when he wanted 5 things done at once and expected them all to be done a minute ago. The worst being when he'd come home from a day of work just 5 minutes after you'd come home yourself from a day of school and somebody had left a mess. He'd only been in the house for 5 minutes, but the dog hair on the floor from this morning was your fault, nobody else's. Those leftover dishes, they were scattered straight from your royal ass across the kitchen sink. And you shook the leaves off that tree in the backyard. And how dare you not have had the house presentable for His Majesty when he trudged himself through that door? And the worst part? You'd put your best effort into cleaning everything else as best as you could in the time that you had, but he still found the one minor, insignificant detail which wasn't yet done. There was never any praise for the job completed, only anger at what there was left to do. So when he got angry that night, I just could not be bothered dealing with it. I'd spent my half hour at home sprucing up the lounge room, folding and putting away Simone's clothes, cleaning up the glasses in the sink which he hated, and fixing each cushion on each couch perfectly. But I'd missed the crumbs. Crumbs of toast scattered lightly by the toaster. Their existence was clearly the work of a madman set to derail my father's day. Their even light spread across the counter was a fierce attack on his livelihood, on the very value of the house which he and my poor mother had sweated and toiled to earn. Crumbs, the total and utter symbol for the spoon-fed, dole-bludging children, their entitled attitudes who had fortified their spot in his abode some 17 years prior. It was 5 crumbs, for fuck's sake. I let him know that there was a screw missing in his brain if he thought 5 fucking breadcrumbs was the epitome of entitlement. I yelled that a screaming match was no way to solve the issue of a few crumbs, and that it had been his mess from this morning, and if he wanted a perfect house, he knew exactly where the sponge was to clean it up. That earned a sponge to the face. The wet sponge melted on my red cheeks. I kicked the fridge so hard that the thing nearly fell over. Then, in a pang of guilt and fear, I ran from the house. I ran to Tom. Tom was family friends with a songwriter for this new and upcoming indie band. He had tickets to a gig where they were the opener to a blues ensemble. He was meant to be taking Penelope, but she'd let him down and he now had a spare ticket. When I rocked up on his doorstep, he handed me the ticket and told me that he had the perfect plan for tonight. I agreed, happy to do anything. We caught the tram into St Kilda, the beachside Melbourne suburb home to many bars and clubs. We were both severely underage at the time, being 15, but had no problems getting in with our VIP tickets. The feeling of skipping a line and doing something we otherwise wouldn't dream of doing was elating. Standing there in the venue surrounded by adults and lovers of new music, I felt so sophisticated and cool. Tom and I tried to shoot shit with a few other patrons as we sipped on raspberry lemonade, but our youthful talk of silly things would have given us away as kids. It took a while for the band to get set up on stage, but when they started, they were unbelievable. The members were so clued into each other and had such dynamic chemistry. They stole the energy from the audience and delivered it back tenfold. I didn't think much of their album, but as a live show, it was a different experience. "Pretty good, eh?" Tom bragged after the first few songs. He had to say it directly into my ear about 5 times before I could hear him, because concert venues love blasting solid sound waves through your skull. Yeah, man, these guys are tight and so groovy. The style wasn't funk or jazz or soul or disco. It was something indescribable and new. It was their own sound, and for the next hour of my life, I became lost in its rhythms. The hypnotic rock bossa drums and funky bass consumed my soul. We even got to hang out backstage with Tom's friend Jason, who wrote most of the songs. I couldn't bring my mouth to articulate when talking to him, making an idiot of myself as I tried to display my admiration for his work. He took my idiocy well, however, and was a real pleasure of a dude. He was a genuinely selfless, do-it-for-the-love-of-music kind of guy, which was rare in the self-obsessed music scene. I joked to him that I play trumpet, and if he ever needed another man on the horn, he should give me a call. He never did call me, though. By the time I got home that night, Dad, Mum, and Simone were all in bed. My legs were sore from all of the standing and dancing, and my ears rang like static. I fell into the warm embrace of my bed and plummeted into a deep, effortless sleep. I woke to the sounds of loud yelling, muffled, but coming from inside the house. Groggily, I rolled over and waited for it to stop, but it got louder. I groaned and flipped over again. My alarm clock showed that it was 3 a.m. Who the hell has a fight at 3 a.m? I moaned to myself. What can you even fight about at 3 a.m? Stuffing my face into the pillow, I tried to ignore the sounds, but the argument became more intense. Surely they can figure this out, I thought. Apparently, they could not. God damn it, this family. I huffed and threw the covers. I stormed down the hallway, stomping my feet as I marched towards the commotion. It was coming from Mum and Dad's room. The door was open. Light and noise were spilling out. I flung myself into the doorframe. Okay, who the fuck has a yelling match at this time? I yelled into the room. The scene wasn't what I expected. Simone was on the phone. Mum was frantic and Dad was in the bed. His eyes were wide open, staring at me, through me. His mouth hung open like a stupid fish, and through it came deep, yet rushed breaths. They were sporadic, too far apart to be normal breaths, and disturbingly noisy. Wake up! Mum yelled into Dad's unresponsive face. She slapped him with her open palm. Once, twice, thrice. His expression did not change. Not even his eyes blinked. The breathing continued. Yes, his eyes are open, Simone calmly said into the phone. He just took a breath, and there's another one. What in the sweet cheese is happening? I asked. My heart rate spiked. Mum stared at me with a tearful and desperate face. Simone gestured into the phone. Mum, what's happening? I asked Mum specifically. She managed to articulate her thoughts. He's not getting up. He fell into the bed and he's not getting up. What? We need to get him on the floor now, Simone demanded. Mum and I rushed over to the bed. I took the weight of his torso. Mum picked up the feet. In her frantic inability to do anything useful, she dropped the feet and I stumbled with the rest. His body thudded against the carpeted floor. I stopped his head from hitting the ground, but at this point, I didn't know that it mattered. He was so blank. I'd never looked into the eyes of somebody and seen nothing. We need to do CPR, Simone said. James, you know CPR. I do, I asked. It should have been clear to me that I did, in fact, know CPR. One of my endeavours to emulate Dad's greatness had led me to a season of surf lifesaving. I knew a lot of first aid. I don't remember what to do, I said, before I realised that the statement was true. He's forgotten, Simone said into the phone. The paramedic chatted to her, the squeaky voice dragging on for an eternity. Dad was dying by my knees. Okay, get on both your hands, put the balls of one on the breastbone, and I put the first hand down. It was clear what I needed to do. I put the other on top and compressed the man's chest as hard as I could. Break a rib. That was all that was going through my head. I remembered learning about CPR and hearing that people never pushed hard enough, so patients died. You couldn't be too scared to break a rib because people don't care if they've got a broken rib if they're alive. I pummeled into his chest as hard as I possibly could. I was too nervous to push while he was breathing though. The paramedic on the line told Simone that we shouldn't breathe for him, but I didn't want to squeeze out the breaths. When I'd done 215 pushes, counted by Simone, she nudged me aside to do her set, but she wasn't pushing hard enough or in the right place. Adrenaline pumped my body. Man the phone, I demanded, and shoved her aside. I railed into Dad with all the strength I could muster. Still, I felt like it wasn't enough. Mum, on the other hand, was running up and down the street like a headless chicken, screaming for help. No one awoke to her calls, not even the doctors across the road, who we found out had taken their holiday. The ambulance arrived, Mum leading them frantically into the room. Firemen heaved at the heavy bed and pushed it aside. A young female paramedic told me that she would take over at the next breath, and when it came, I passed my father on to her. We were corralled into the kitchen by a fireman as paramedics and their equipment cascaded into the bedroom. I watched them jog between the master bedroom and the front door, acting as couriers between the ambulance and the scene. The fireman tried to talk to us, but we mostly sat in silence, watching the minutes tick over on the kitchen clock. It was excruciating. Despite the organized chaos ensuing in the house, each second took its own lifetime. The emergency servicemen and women went from jogging to running between the bedroom and the front doors. The firemen tried to distract us, to talk about absolutely anything else, but we were too intrigued. In that moment, I understood that my dad might not make it. I hadn't come to that conclusion before. I couldn't handle it. I felt the pain again. That sharp prick of heat and discomfort in the base of my neck. This was not the first time I'd ever felt it, but it was the most powerful. As I felt my neck flare, I could feel another odd sensation. I held my dad's breath in the palm of my hand. I could feel it as it poured in and out of his mouth. I could see it even in my mind's eye, a whole house away, drifting aimlessly between the room and his lungs. It was bizarre. I knew that his breath was not between the fingers on my left hand, but it was there that I felt it run cold over my skin, like I was reaching out to him. His breath pulled in and pushed out. Pulled in and pushed out. Like the tide of the beach, waves lazily rolling over the sand. The air moved quickly, continually so. More dominant in my senses was the air that came from the compressions, now forcefully escaping from his mouth. They were pressing harder, but he was breathing less. I'm just daydreaming, I said to myself, still keen on the sensation. My neck throbbed intensely now. I fell to my knees on the floor. I could hear people yelling at me from all around. The fireman got down to my level, but I couldn't communicate with him. I was stuck in my thoughts and feelings. I'm dreaming. He's not dying. He can't. He's made of stone. The last of the old bulls, the strongest man I know. A fitter man doesn't exist. Come on, man. Breathe, you arrogant bastard. In my hands, I felt his last breath. It petered into nothingness, drowned out by the intense compressions. I went into an awesome hot flush. From my neck, heat radiated throughout my body. I was instantly sweating, my skin beat red. Time slowed down, and in my ears rung so intensely that I couldn't hear anything. My chest turned to fire, my breath to hot smoke as it poured out of my lungs. I couldn't comprehend what was happening and what I was feeling. Reality came down on me like a crushing weight, and I faded out of consciousness. My vision went to black, and I fell face first onto the cold wooden floor. I awoke to the sound of gentle waves crashing into sand. I could hear the water foaming, air escaping it, and it being dragged back out to sea. My face was cold, my body was cold. I can see in front of me a large vegetated sand dune, and above it a violent grey sky. I wrenched myself off the ground to see the beach before me. The sea was dark and the waves much rougher than the gentle sound they made. They were at least 6 feet tall each, and they moved away from the shore, crashing out to sea and rolling into the horizon of a churning ocean. It was king tide rolling out. The waves out at sea were growling and blindly crashing over themselves. I pulled myself off the ground and brushed the sand off my body. It got stuck to me. The way that sand gets stuck to wet skin, it irritated me. There was a man standing on the beach near me. He wore a blue and green robe and had a darker complexion. He was standing too far down the beach for me to see his face, but his presence wasn't ominous. He made me feel safe. Looking out to the ocean, I got a feeling that I often had. I felt that if I reached out, I could touch the sky. I could pull myself through it and soar in the air. Freedom lay before me. On this feeling alone, I sprinted towards the water. I leaped off the wet sand, my body hanging over the outwards rolling waves below. I pushed my hands down like swimming in the air. I was propelled upwards by my push. The sky had me, and I would not fall. I kicked with my feet and spiraled through the atmosphere, riding like a jet stream, like a corkscrew, high into the sky. I was at least 100 feet high, looking down at the ocean. I halted myself. I held my hands out and tilted down to the water. I dove straight down. Air cascaded through my hair. I could feel the salt spraying up from the tumultuous sea. It bombarded my face as I raced into oblivion. At the last instant, I commanded the sky under my body and I pulled up. My stomach dropped through my pants like the drop of a roller coaster. I swooped away from the water's surface, flying ever upwards. I looked back towards the sand. From my place high in the air, I saw the robe man leaving. He crested the dune and then bobbed out of sight. A sea breeze built up as he did so. It started lightly, and once he was gone, there was a proper ocean wind. There was a new figure on the beach where I'd woken up. They stood tall, covered in armour. They had a squarish silver helmet adorned by a large fin on top and a spatula-like chin protrusion. They stared at me with their large green eyes, like glowing screens. They had silver chest armour and a green and black mechanical body underneath. Large spikes rose from their shoulders. They had bulky silver feet and unusually thin joints. Their hands were silver and their fingers were ungodly long. I had seen this figure before. He appeared in the other dreams of mine. I couldn't decide, though, if here they looked malicious. It flicked its wrist quickly, and a rod sprung into its grip from nothing. From the rod ejected two prongs, forming a fork and a long green blade which ran parallel to the staff right down its whole length, connected to the leading prong, supported just below the hand. My belief that I could fly was suddenly suspended. I felt the heavy pull of gravity on my body, and I felt the air dissolve around me. It felt stupid to believe that I could hold onto it and push myself through it. I fell immediately. Down, down into the swell churning below. Down, down into the dangerous dark water. Wind swirled around my ears and arms. I was falling feet first into the sea. I was cast in immense pain as I crashed onto the ocean's surface. I felt my whole body bruise on impact. I sunk into the water. It was too dark to see. I was too hurt to move, and too far from air to breathe. I forced myself to move. I broke through the surface and opened my mouth. A wave crashed over my face. I fought my way out of its tumble and surfaced, but water rushed into my desperate mouth. I spluttered violently as the wave passed. I heard a rumble from the shore. The silver and green bulky figure had blasted off. He soared on a stream of air straight towards me. He was closing in quickly, his predatory green eyes locking onto me, his staff head glowing green between its prongs. I braced for impact. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of my breath against the churning of the waves. The world was crashing around me, and I could hear him coming for me. I did not know what that figure wanted from me. Nothing happened. All sounds faded out, leaving me with just my panicked breaths. I was no longer bobbing in the churning sea. I was face down on flat ground. The fireman was pulling me up, and I struggled off him. I rubbed my head. It hurt. A paramedic was walking down the hallway towards us. Her face was sour. She had bad news, but I already knew what it was. My father was dead. And what was my last word to him? The man who built me from a boy to a man. The man who inspired me to be active, to do sports. The man who I, with all of my heart, could not more deeply aspire to. Was it, I love you? No. I told him to stick it about some crumbs left in the kitchen and his insistence that I clean them up. I loved him, and he died without telling me the same, all because of some breadcrumbs. Mum cried on Simone's shoulder. I rejected their embrace, or the words of the paramedic. I went to the sink, took the sponge, and I wiped the bench down. I held the crumbs in my hand, and I threw them into the bin. I could cry now.